Blackwell. I'm the Managing Artistic Director here at Fourth Line Theatre, and welcome to Festival Fridays here at Fourth Line. But without further ado, would you all join me in welcoming up to the stage Darcy Jenish, who is the playwright of the Tilco Strike. Hi, Darcy. Hi, thanks for joining me.
Well, thank you for having me. My pleasure.
So we're both, do you know the major thing that you and I have in common besides the Tilco Strike play?
Well, we both went to Adam Scott.
Yeah, we're both on the Wall of Fame at Adam Scott, Darcy Jenish and I. Yes, I saw us there the other day when I went to see Edmondson Heights' excellent production of The Wizard of Oz. So you grew up in Peterborough, but there's a Saskatchewan connection, yes?
Yeah, I always say, my standard joke is I was always telling people I'm going to get 2 tattoos. One on the right shoulder that says made in Saskatchewan, and the left shoulder says polished in Peterborough.
Oh, okay. Let's do one for Tracy.
I grew up in, I started off in Estevan, Saskatchewan. I lived there till the end of grade 8, and then my father passed away prematurely, and my mother had grown up in Peterborough, so she wanted to come back to the home. So we moved down here as I was going into grade 9, and actually it was the summer of 1966, which was...
That's the year I was born. Sorry, I had to say that. I'm in a cheeky mood. I'm just warning everybody.
So that was when the Tilco Strike was just running out of gas, and of course I was only 14 and discovering a new city and new friends, and so had no idea that this thing would even happen. It didn't come to my attention until many years later.
Yeah. Now you are and were a major Canadian writer. You worked at Maclean's for 25 years. Yes.
15.
15 years.
Yeah.
Okay. And but I am curious about, were you a writer as a young person? Like, are you a guy with, journal since you're 8 years old?
I was probably more of a reader. My mother, for some reason, encouraged reading. We always had the Examiner and the Saturday Star and Time magazine. I read Time magazine from cover to cover. My girlfriends get tired of hearing me saying I read it in Time magazine. But I was a prolific letter writer because we had moved from Saskatchewan to Peterborough. And all these kids that I'd gone through lower school with, for some reason I was one of those guys that kept in touch. So I wrote a lot of letters, and that seemed, I was pretty studious, I guess, when it came to essays, because I seemed to do all my high school essays, and I started going to the Using the Trent Libraries in grade 11, and started off at Rubich Hall, which is that senior
My dad lives there.
Does he?
Yeah.
Well, that was the old administrative center and library for Trent University, first library. And then when they opened BATA in 1968 or 69, we would go out there in grade 12 and 13 and use the library. So in that sense, obviously, I was kind of into books and reading and writing, and I worked hard at writing essays. So.
Now, it's interesting, last night, as a fluke, an incredible article on you, I think a really excellent article on Cortha Now, written by Paul Rellinger, came out. Kind of a definitive piece, so did you see it?
Yes.
Yeah, I thought it was great.
It was great. It was very comprehensive and gave the whole ball of wax. I mean, I started off in a weekly newspaper down in Dunnville, Ontario, down near south of Hamilton. So I did 2 years there, then I did 2 years on a small daily in St. Thomas, and then I got this job out west.
Is that the Alberta Reporter? No.
Alberta Report,
okay, yeah. That was a big deal at the time.
Well,
right?
It was a very big deal, and it was a great place to be because there was all this turmoil and upheaval around the National Energy Program and then the birth of the Reform Movement. And it was a lot of turbulence. It was a very exciting time to be there, and also I worked for a guy who's a great journalist, Ted Byfield, who he just really did. It was the first time I really had an editor who corrected your mistakes and got you rid of repetition and all these little things. And
red penning, I love red penning.
Yes. Anyways, it was an interesting place because in those days we were all still on typewriters, and we had this desk. I was an editor, and Ted would sit at the head of the desk and with the editors around him, and he would walk in. Usually he'd come in, he was always in a rush and always going somewhere, and everything was kind of crazy and chaotic at this magazine. He'd sit there and pull out these copies that everybody had written, and you'd be just dreading the fact when he got to your story, because what were they going to say, I remember saying to people, Jen, you really made a mess of this story, you got it. Or if he liked what you do, I said he was like a big floppy sheepdog. He was all over you, loving what you'd written. So he was a great guy to work with, and the first person I really worked with that got me, really some disciplined writing. So.
And so, where'd you start McLean's in '86?
'86, yeah.
Yeah. So how do you go from the Alberta Reporter to McLean's? Because McLean's in '86, it's the gold standard. It's Canada's Time magazine.
Yeah,
yes.
It was a big magazine. It was a great place to be, and I had a real good run there from '86 till '01. And I said, like in that article, I said it was the last sort of golden age of the mainstream media. I mean, for the first few years I was there, they were always sending you on I was on a plane here, a plane there. Well, we came home from vacation one time in Quebec with my ex-wife, and anyway, she just took the kids off on the Monday morning, went off somewhere, and I'd go to work not knowing what I'm going to be doing this week. This was during the ochre crisis, so it's a Monday morning. We had the Monday morning editorial meeting, and so anyways, so we need somebody to go to Oka. Boom, you're it. So I'm on the plane at noon hour, and my wife comes home with the kids, and she doesn't know where I am. So I phoned her at 7 or 8 o'clock. I said, I'm in Laval. She said, no, you're not. Where are you? I said, I'm in Laval. They're sending me to Oka. I got to cover the ochre crisis. So I spent the week there with at the ochre crisis, behind the enemy lines, he said. And so it was that sort of thing. I was getting sent all over the place. And then the last few years with budget restraints and all that, I just mainly was traveling around Ontario. So I remember I kept track of them. I wrote stories from 50 different places in Ontario.
In 1 year?
No.
The time. Okay.
Yeah.
And so do you remember a moment when you thought things are starting to shift with the media?
Well, it happened pretty suddenly. We had a change of editors, and first big staff meeting, they announced that there were going to be layoffs. And I was out of the office that day because I was out of the office every opportunity I could get. I was off doing something somewhere. And I come back, and so for the next 3 weeks, everybody's walking around on pins and needles in a state of terror. And anyway, so they sent 8 of us packing on the first day, our first round of these layoffs. 8 of us. And this is another one of my claims to fame. It was June 11th, 2001, which was the same day Timothy McVie made his exit.
Wow.
He was the Oklahoma City bomber. Yeah. So I was technically terminated, but I always said I got liberated because I was making less money as a freelance writer, but I had a lot more fun, so that was the trade-off.
Wow. All right. So then, were you already, because you've written a lot of non-fiction books. Like, you haven't written any fiction books.
No.
So you've written a lot of non-fiction. Were you already writing books at this time?
Yeah, no, I wrote 3 books when I was at McLean's.
Okay.
I wrote the hockey book, and I wrote this Find This Deficit book about the whole deficit thing.
Yeah, with Trudeau, Mulrooney, and the bankruptcy.
Money to Burn. It wasn't a big seller. Came out a little too late.
It's a great title.
Great title. And then I wrote what I call my Indian book, which was story of the 19th century West. I had this idea of writing the opening of the West as a sort of symphony in 3 movements, which would be the exploration era, the expropriation era, and the exploitation era when you get into the homesteading and farming era. So I did this book I just did profiles of 4 indigenous leaders, Piapot, Big Bear, Crowfoot, and Poundmaker, and they had to lead their peoples through that whole terrible, traumatic time of, there was war, famine, and disease. It was really an apocalypse, what it was, in the 19th century. And anyways, the neat thing about it was that Piapot, who was the least well-known, but he was born first and died last. So he was born in they think 1804 to, something 1912, lived over 100.
Wow.
And then it was Big Bear and Crowfoot, and they were in the middle, and then this Poundmaker was born last and died first. So I set it up like that. I told you the first part of the stories. And so, yeah, that's what I did at McLean's in the 90s.
But you hadn't been in Peterborough for decades, right? So what brought you back here?
Well...
Or were you in and out?
Yeah, I was in and out all my life, because my mother lived here until she passed away, and then I have a brother here. Okay. And then... when Fourth Line Theatre started, I remember seeing that feature documentary
on the Journal
in 1992.
I remember stoking the fire so they could do interviews around that fire. I still have a scar from that. But anyways.
So I saw this, and I thought, wow, this is amazing. And I knew some of the people in it. Matt Shaughnessy and Joel Mackhurst were both in it. And so I thought, well, I got to get up there. So in 1993, I came up, and then started bringing friends up. When you did Sunday shows.
Yeah, I remember that.
We would come up.
They didn't sell. We had to get rid of them.
Oh,
they didn't sell.
Well, I did my part.
Yeah, I know. You tried.
We would come up on a Sunday afternoon. There was 3 or 4 couples and their kids, and we would have a picnic down in Millbrook, because obviously this all wasn't here. We'd have a picnic in Millbrook and then come up for the show. And so I saw the Blazers a couple times in the 90s, and then of course what I really remembered was the Winslow's at Derryford, which was a fantastic
95,
show.
yeah. 83 in the cast of that.
Was it? It was,
yeah,
that was great. So that's what kind of, and then through the 2000s, I think I've seen 12 different shows up here, because your program last year had the 45 original program, and I looked at them all, it was either 12 or 15. So this was kind of my main theater experience of, the 90s and 2000s, and because of the Peterborough connection, local history, and the fact that I can come up here and drop into Peterborough and this and that. So I've had a lifelong connection with the city.
Right, okay. So I am very curious, because actually I don't know this. I know my part of where I start to get involved in this, but what on earth gave you the idea to approach us about a play? What gave you the idea to write a play? And this play specifically. There's 3 questions in there.
Well,
I can repeat them because I couldn't remember if someone asked me 3 questions right now. It'd have to be one at a time.
Well, it was that Joan Sangster's paper. When I got commissioned to write a history of Trent University, the 50 years of Trent. So I interviewed people high and low. I mean, from first-year students to most past presidents. I interviewed all the past presidents. And anyways, so when I interviewed Joan Sangster, who was this distinguished Canadian historian, told me about her work doing research on the women who worked in Peterborough factories in the 30s through the 60s. And she told me about the Tilco Strike, and when I read this paper of hers, I just thought this is a natural for Fourth Line. Because it's local history, because there was real sharp conflicts. I mean, there was fist fights on the picket lines. I know Fourth Line likes a good fist fight.
We love a good fist fight in our plays.
I've seen lots of fist fights
in our plays.
So I kind of knew it was a natural, and plus I was familiar with the venue and the theater, and this is going to be it would have to be a big cast, and you have the space to accommodate that. So I mean, I just sent you a one-line email, I think in the fall of 2015. I had no idea whether I could do this or not. I'd never done anything like it, never thought about doing anything like it, but when the opportunity came along, it just seemed to be a fit, and I seemed to be able to navigate my way through, although obviously you were more the navigator, I was the writer. And I wrote a lot of stuff, and we threw a lot of stuff out. I mean, which
just trimmed, maybe?
Trimmed.
No, but you have to overwrite. Do you overwrite in books? I'm curious about that.
For sure. I mean, my last one on the FLQ, I mean, we were dealing with the manuscript, and I remember get the manuscript back from my editor. This is at Doubleday Canada. I think on a Monday he sends me an email. He says, we got to cut this back. He says, you can't run it to 400 pages. It's got to be around 370 or 375. He said, can you cut 15,000 words and get it back to me by Wednesday?
See, I'm nothing compared to that. 15,000 words.
So I took a good whack at it, and I took out 7,000 or 8,000 by Wednesday and got it back to him. And, you don't miss it. Like, you think, oh, these are precious words, and this is a great, I'd have this pretty good material. Not, it wasn't that the writing was anything wrong with the writing. No. It was good material, but he was a little extraneous, and then when you take it out, you realize that the story's flowing a lot better.
Right. And so I'm curious, did you do tons of research to start, and then once you felt you had all your research for this play, then did you start to write, or how was the process?
Well, with this one, of course, I did the research first, and then which was interviews and reading the Examiner, and that. When I wrote a book, I would just get going and just start something and work. Just find a thread that you could use or something you could follow. Like with my FLQ book, the way I got into that was through a magazine story. When I did the magazine story, I started off doing a 40th anniversary story on the October crisis in 2010, and this was for Legion magazine. So I phoned a couple guys in Montreal that I knew to see that had been around for a long time, and I thought, well, they could maybe give me some local color or their involvement. And this one guy says, oh no, you got to talk to Robert Cote. He was head of the Montreal Bomb Squad in the 1960s. And so I interviewed this guy, and I thought, oh my God. He explained the whole thing, how this occurred in ways. But the basic
this book is available, by the way.
Yeah, should have brought a few copies today. I got a box of them sitting at home. Anyways, Bob Cote was a very gregarious, great guy. He defused 33 bombs with his bare hands during the last bomb had 130 pounds of dynamite. It was in a stolen Volkswagen Beetle that was parked in a tunnel beneath the head office complex of the Bank of Montreal. So he was my entree in it, and I just started with that. You know, I would just start with something that I figured I could start writing, and then do the research as I went along.
So you would catch up, the research would catch up to the writing.
Yeah, I'd have
but this is different, what you did with the Tilco Strike.
Yeah, I did the research here so I could get, you know, scope out the story and get a grounds of where it was at. And then some of these interviews I did, like with the late Bill Woodbeck, we don't want to give away the story here, but you know, he talked about this Tilco song, this guy's going to jail, and all of this. I thought, man,
you're going to see that song in the play.
Yeah.
You're going to forget that in the next 2.5 hours.
Yeah.
But and the Travelers actually recorded the Tilco song, which is so interesting, right?
Yeah, they
Canadian folk band.
The Canadian folk band did a version of the Tilco song. So when I did some of these interviews, and some of the stuff that was in the newspapers, some of these incidents during the strike, I said, this is just golden. I mean, we can do something with this. I mean, and, you know, you kind of knew how a labor dispute was going to unfold. You know, you got to have the organizing, you got to have, you know, the introduction, you know, meeting the employer and everything that happened. And because it's built up as such a big, sharp conflict, it was just a matter of doing it step by step. And, you know, I hadn't done this before, so wrote certain approaches I took. And, you know, they were better, as I found out, there was a better way to get into it. So, but it worked out. I mean, I wrote a lot of stuff that didn't make the cut, but they always say in movies, you know, 50% of the stuff winds up on the floor. So. Cutting the floor.
Do you remember the first scene that you wrote for this play? And did it make the cut?
Didn't make the cut.
Didn't? What was the first scene you wrote?
Well, remember the story was that.
Oh, you had the former boss and the ghost.
The ghost, the ghost,
yeah,
the ghost of Puck Curtain. It was kind of cute stuff.
It was, yeah.
I thought there'd never been a ghost in a fourth line theater play. Anyways, this was an American company, Tilton and Cook, and they come up here and opened up in Peterborough in 1947 because of all the Peterborough factories, and they could do this custom molding of plastic products, which they were doing for West Clocks and Outboard Marine, and I think even General Electric. And anyways, they eventually sold out to their Canadian manager, who was a guy named Bob Puck Curtain, who was a big figure in the Peterborough sporting scene. And he died in 1961, which opened the door for the other three guys, Hammett, Tripp, and Harwood, to buy the business. So I remember I started it with a wake, you know, and to try to introduce the characters and that. And anyways, we got as far as, we did a reading here in 2018, and we decided, maybe there's a better way to go about it. So then I came up with our little prologue there that you're going to see. And that worked a lot better because it was, like, injection molding was a difficult thing you had to sort of explain to the audience just a basic Cole's Notes version of how injection molding worked. So that's what I figured we ought to do.
It's very Cole's Notes. Don't get afraid that the whole beginning of the play is about injection molding. It is not. It's very fast.
Very fast. But anyway, so that worked a lot better. And then the other thing that helped was, for some reason, you know, our little lunch at Denny's, I figured out who these characters were right off the bat, how I could differentiate these 5 women. And that really got me going on the right path, I think. And yeah, so I mean, it all worked out. I think you were the theater professional, and there was something I'd never done. So if something wasn't working, that was fine. You could always figure out a different way to do it. And, you know, it all came together beautifully, I got to say. I mean, I was happy with everything at the end of the day. You know, the casting's wonderful. So there's a tremendously talented cast here. And, you know, when I've watched them perform, and I'm sort of suddenly they just seem to take ownership of it to the point where I'm suddenly wondering, like, gee, did I actually write some of this?
I know, that's the most amazing moment. You're like, did I write that? That's good. Yeah, no, for sure.
And so, no, it's been a fantastic experience. I mean, it wasn't something I ever thought I would be doing, and I never really aspired to do. I mean, when I was younger, I thought, oh, I want to write fiction, but from a mature vantage point now, when you see what it takes, the detail, and the writing dialogue was just kind of nice. It was a lot lighter in terms of you're just writing dialogue, and it was actually lighter than writing nonfiction because you're sitting there every day.
And it's all fact with nonfiction. You kind of can't make anything up. You have you have a lot of research.
Yeah.
But you have made whole conversations up, right?
Well, not in those books. In this I have.
That's what I'm saying. In this you have the freedom of just going into offices that we don't know what happened in and writing what you think happened, using your imagination.
Yeah. So it was a totally different exercise. But yeah, I don't think I struggled with it as much as sometimes when I had to... Like when I was writing books, I was also working full-time when I was either at planes or as freelance. And so I would have to be up at my desk at 6:30 in the morning, wouldn't have breakfast, 6:30 to 8:30, got to get up 5 days a week and churn out 350 or 500 words, do the magazine work of the day, sometimes run off to a library in mid-afternoon, get back around 9:30 or 10 o'clock and read what I was going to write the next day. And then, get up every day and write your 350 or 500 words. So it was a heavy way to do things. And this was, because it was more just imaginative and writing a lot fewer words. I mean, the text is 22,000 words versus a book that can be 100 or 110,000.
Okay.
So it was just fun. I mean, I thoroughly enjoyed it. It was just, and the story was great, and I always could envision that, geez, one day this is going to be produced. I've never been through this before.
Yeah. What, you didn't, I just want to be clear, you did not interview any of the characters that we see actually in the play, but people around them? Or did you interview any of these people? Because we use real names.
Yeah, real names. Well, no, I didn't, because obviously the principals, like Harwood or Dutch Pammett, Donald Harwood and Donald Tripp, they've passed away. Most of these women are long gone. So no, I didn't. I did find 3 women who were working here at the time, but they didn't have any real good stories to tell. They didn't seem to recall any big issue. And so no, I didn't. The only guy that I interviewed who had first-hand experience was the late Pat Baker, who just died.
Is he a salesman there?
He was a salesman.
Oh, okay.
And he was one of the guys who bought out Tripp, Harwood, and Dutch.
So they owned it from what, 61 till?
Probably the mid-70s.
Okay.
And then Pat Baker and his partners carried on until about 1996. Oh. So it was a successful company. And then Tim Barry, who was a high school guy from my era at Adam Scott, bought the equipment, and he now runs Merit Precision Molding.
Oh, that's where a lot of the equipment went?
That's where initially. He's and actually,
sure he's not using that equipment anymore.
I think he says he still does have some of the machines from Tilco.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. And but Tilco was founded by the Tilton and Cook families in Leominster, Massachusetts in 1867. And they first made combs and barrettes out of cow's horns and turtle shells.
Wow.
Until you got plastic started to come into, in the early 1900s, and then you could get into this injection molding. But no, there wasn't anybody, I don't think, other than Pat Baker, because he worked there at the time.
Yeah.
And Bill Woodruff, the labor guys.
Right.
Some of the labor guys.
So you did interview some of them.
Yeah, and then this guy who worked there named Keith Brown, who was the same name as our MPP at the time. There was a Keith Brown that worked at Tilco all his life.
Oh, what's it? But he's not our car salesman.
No,
MPP,
no.
MPP Keith
not
Brown.
Not the MPP
okay.
Keith Brown.
Who is maybe a character in our play.
He is, indeed. He has a small part. And so, so I interviewed him. So it was kind of cool. But Pat gave me some insights into the plant, who some of the characters were, the janitor and this and that.
But you interviewed some of the descendants of some of the characters, yes?
Well, yeah. I mean, about Dutch Pam's daughter, Nancy, who was here Tuesday night.
And liked it, thank heavens. Thank
yeah,
heavens.
She said.
Because the lens of this piece is labor, so
yes.
She was concerned.
She was concerned.
Yeah.
And she knew, it was interesting, I did interview Nancy, and she knew most of the people who were in the play. She knew them as personal. And so she could juggle what we put on stage versus what she knew. But she was fine with it. She said, for some reason we got a lot of it right, but she said she was.
I know.
She actually said she was laughing her head off when she went to bed that night, because there is some funny stuff in the play. I got to say, it's which, even though it's a kind of heavy story, which it really is, the humor in it kind of lightens it, and it. So she really liked it. I mean, she's been writing me ever since.
I know. I got one today too. No, she really did like it. No, it's great. Yeah, and we were nervous about that because because you know, you are kind of looking at the Tilco Strike, but you're also looking at Peterborough and the labor movement in this period. And Peterborough was a huge labor town in this period.
Yeah, I mean, well, 54 trade unions, and actually I just heard a story the other day that Pat Baker was the old goalie for the Peterborough Lakers back in the 60s. He was a big sports figure, but...
Like Lakers?
Yeah, the lacrosse team.
Oh, lacrosse, okay.
And anyways, Tim Berry was telling me this, that this is how, you know, agitated everybody was. But anyways, Pat Baker's playing goal for the Lakers at the old Civic Arena. And it was a very tight, small place, and it was chicken wire around the end zone where he was playing goal. And one night for a Lakers game, all these union guys packed the spaces behind it, the standing room spaces, and they just hounded him for the whole game because they knew he was working at Tilco. And that's the way it was back in the day. And
well, and there's a late edition scene, I don't mean to interrupt you, but around somebody being accosted at, I assume, Lakeview Bowl.
Lakeview Bowl.
Yeah, somebody going for bowling and getting accosted there, right? Like, it really did permeate the whole community, yes?
Oh, yeah. I mean, you know, the Peterborough Ministerial Association put out statements in favor of the women, and there was editorials in the Examiner, and, I mean, actually, even the Toronto Star devoted some coverage to this strike, because it really kind of made the headlines, and yeah, there was a lot of support from the community. I mean, lawyers were, you know, there were interviews with people who were arguing in favor of, you know, giving these women a contract, giving them a break. So yeah, it really infiltrated the community, and you know, all these big factories. This was Peterborough's heyday as a manufacturing center. You know, General Electric, Outboard, Quaker, Westclox, all these, and right down to the smaller places. And of course, Tilco was at the bottom end of that whole industrial spectrum. I mean, it was probably 100 or 125 employees. And
some of them were exempt from the strike, right?
The men, yeah, there was like tool and die makers, and they didn't take part. So it was really the women who were, they did the real repetitive work in the factories. And well, that was the other thing I was able to draw on in this. I think I said this is some of the other stuff I wrote, but when I was a university student, I had 6 factory jobs, 6 jobs, summer jobs in Peterborough factories. I worked in Outboard.
Do you keep getting fired? The math of that doesn't work. I think maybe you did.
Well, the truth be told, I did. I could not keep up with these guys on the chainsaw line at Outboard Marine. It was insane. They were on piecework. They were supposed to make 45 chainsaws an hour, and there was only 12 guys to make a chainsaw. And the chainsaw line was like no longer than this tent. And you'd have 12 stations. And it wasn't like put the screw in or two, you know, you had to do 2 or 3 things. And I was the floater, and I kept getting moved from one station to the other, so I always had cuts in different parts of my hands because you had metal and stuff. And one station I remember was I had to put in a spark plug. I had to get like a gas, like a nozzle, like the thing you see at the gas station. So I had to pull it down on a string, take the lid off the gas tank, give it a squirt, and put it in. And of course, these guys are trying to do 55 an hour for the first hour or so, 2 hours, so that then they could coast for the last, sit around for 45 minutes or an hour at the end of the day and smoke and shoot the breeze. So I'd be so far behind, they'd have to stop the line because there'd be 6 machines behind my station. So they weren't happy, so I didn't last long at that job. But I did better on the snowmobile line. Then I was in a warehouse, and then I was at Quaker twice, and I was at Domtar Packaging once, which is where the Staples store is now.
Yeah.
And but I did see some of the repetitive stuff that these women at Tilco would be doing. Like I worked at Quaker Oats one time, and there was these women who would just sit at these like round sort of platforms that would rotate, and they had like a cereal box size metal, you know, peg on them, and they would just take cereal boxes all day that were flattened, pop them open, and put them on these things, and then this thing would keep circulating, and they'd fill it with cereal. And so you'd sit there, they had hairnets on, these white uniforms, they'd sit there for 8 hours, just pop, and sort of that was what it was like in some of these factories. Like, if you're assembling something, it was a different cup of tea, but if you were doing that sort of work, and like what these women would have been doing at Tilco, it would have been very, just so repetitive, doing hundreds
like a little bit mind-numbing.
Mind-numbing, yeah, for sure. Yeah.
Well, I'm being mindful of your time and our time with our next guest, but I just I'm so thrilled you came and let me pick at your brain a bit about it all. And I think what's so great about these talks is that they give the people seeing it on this night a little bit deeper understanding of what you're seeing, and things resonate a bit more. And I'm so thrilled. I mean, it was great fun. It was a 2-year longer process than we thought it would be because of that. COVID, but we got it up, and I'm so thrilled, and I can't wait for you all to see Darcy's play tonight. So would you all join me in thanking Darcy Jenish?